Breaking tonight, Timothy Busfield is a free man, at least for now. A New Mexico judge denying the state's motion to hold him without bond, ruling that prosecutors did not meet the high legal bar to keep him jailed pre-trial. Is there even going to be a trial? Busfield walks under strict conditions as this case barrels toward a grand jury.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, SDS Nation? Welcome to the global phenomenon that is Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime. Tonight, we are breaking down all things Timothy Busfield. He's the actor best known for appearing in the show 30-something and then West Wing. There was a detention ruling. Of course, he has been accused on SA charges of minor children. We're going to get to what the judge said, what the prosecution had to say, what the defense actually accomplished today, and the optics that might be haunting this case going forward. Without further ado, he was here with us for the entire detention hearing. John Day, criminal defense out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Next up, you've got Anna Sonoda, licensed clinical social worker out of the great state of Georgia. And she is the author of Duck, Duck, Groom, an expert of sorts, as you might imagine, in grooming. And last but not least, we have David Sarney, a retired detective with the NYPD, the largest police department and the best in all the world. Welcome to everybody. Just a very quick recap. The judge denying the state's request to hold Timothy Busfield without bond. The court found that probable cause exists, but that the state failed to show clear and convincing evidence of unavoidable danger. Let's stop it there. Let me go to David Sarney. I know, David, you were trying to watch the hearing in real time as we were. And just wondering if you are surprised at all, David, by the fact that a guy accused of, child SA here was just basically let out of jail pending a potential trial with pretty strict conditions. Are you surprised?
When you deal with these things, thanks for having me. There's always the judge's determination based on the facts they're given. The judge didn't think there was enough reason to remand him or detain him for whatever reason. The prosecution put out a very good reason because there's been an alleged history for the defendant in this case, but it wasn't convincing enough that he thought, at least the judge thought, there was a clear and present danger to anyone else outside of the victims in this case. And does it surprise you? Not anymore, because I think the defense did a really good thing, and they put it out there going, he came back, he did come after he figured out what was coming. Like, came 2,000 miles, drove here, and they, I guess, were able to convince the judge that he really is not a danger to the society.
Thank you. John Day, you watched this with me. Now that you've had 10 minutes maybe to digest it all, your thoughts, generally speaking.
Interesting, and we talked about it before, but the judge is going down this list of factors he has to consider the case as presented by the prosecution. And he said, when I look at the weight of the evidence, and in New Mexico, the weight of the evidence is one of these 6 factors that the judge looks at. He said, I think based on what I've heard, the weight of the evidence is neutral. Kind of interesting. If you are the defense, you're looking at that saying, man, the prosecutor put on the best case they had right now. That doesn't mean they have to put on everything, but the prosecutor put on its case, and a judge said, it's like 50-50 here. I did not hear anything that was super strong for the prosecution. So if you're the prosecutor, you're going to want to fine tune that a little bit. But it's also sending a message that the judge right now sees this as sort of a 50-50 thing. If you're the defense, you're like, yeah, we did a good job of neutralizing that.
Yeah, and John, just to follow that up, I mean, if the judge here sort of, as you just used the phrase 50-50, you've got a man who's supposed to be presumed innocent. Does he have his hands tied? In other words, did he have to let him out?
Well, if that's how he saw it, and that, again, there are 5 other factors he's got to consider, but that's one of the biggest ones. I mean, the other ones are, what's his criminal history? he doesn't have any. The judge even said none of these other allegations were adjudicated in a court of law, and that apparently made made a big difference for him as well. Again, what we know the next step is going to be is a grand jury, and in New Mexico, if you're the defense, you get to tell the prosecutor, here's all the evidence we want you to present, because it's exculpatory evidence. And if there's exculpatory evidence, which means it's evidence which favors the defense, the prosecutor has to put it on. So we're going to have a rehash of the same thing in a grand jury presentation. And there's certainly a chance, I think, based on what we saw today, that it might be a tough sell to some grand jurors.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. The evidence seems a little muddled, if I could use that word. There's a comment here for John Day specifically. I thought the judge said Busfield could not be near the children in this case.
Yeah.
Is what the judge said. That seems to be SOP, right, John?
Right, that's correct. The judge, what he said was, you can't be around as a release condition. He said, you can't be around any minor children unsupervised. So we can't be around anybody under the age of 18 without somebody else being present. And so that was one of the conditions. And that was what the prosecutor asked for. And the judge said, absolutely, I'm going to give that as a condition.
The COE already cut some sound, as we say in the news business. We'll get to that in just a second. A lot of the past accusers, this is from Gia and TJ's mom, a lot of the past accusers are over 18 now. So could they be called? They can be called as witnesses, correct? John Day, what about these prior allegations and these, alleged victims coming forward as adult witnesses now? Is that a possibility?
So these are really good questions. Now look at what even the judge touched on this a little bit, addressed this. He said, look, some of these allegations are all about the prior ones, basically were about females. And a lot of them, he said, were about post-pubescent females. So allegations made by women who were not minors about Busfield. And he said, this is different than the allegations in this case, which are about two underage minor boys. And he made that that was something that stuck in his mind. So does that come in against Busfield? I don't think so. And one of the most recent tests of that was the Harvey Weinstein trial. The judge in that case let prior accusations, prior victims of Weinstein come in front of the jury. That was overturned in a court of appeals decision. So that shows you how tough it can be to get prior accusations in. I think in this case, they don't come in because they don't involve underage boys, which is the allegation here.
Anna Sonoda, there were some revelations that I did not know about. I don't think John Day did, but John, correct me if I'm wrong, about the father in this case. Oh, there goes John Day. We just lost two of our guests. Anna, it could be a shorter show. Good thing I was asking you the question, but we are learning some new information about the father in this case, and that is that he is a disbarred attorney that was caught in a mortgage scam and actually served prison time. So my question to you is it possible that the parents here, or the father specifically, is an unsavory character, but also that the abuse happened? Is it possible that both are true?
Well, his character is certainly being called into question. That information does not paint him in a good light. And in regards to Busfield being released, I think one of the things that we need to remember is that most sex offenders, most predators are not locked up. Most sexual predators never actually see the inside of a courtroom. So it's important for your audience and the people watching tonight to remember that the court of law is only handling a fraction of the cases that come against children, and child sex abuse is a rampant, unreported problem. So it is certainly going to be an interesting case to watch as we see it unfold.
Yeah, Scotch's mom, member for 10 months. Welcome. A lot of new members. Please hit that like and subscribe button on the way in. We've also got an active Patreon page. Judge did not deny bail. He released Busfield on his own recognizance. We have sound. This is very important. This came up in the hearing today, and with the issues, we'll get to this in one second, but there was audio played in the hearing. This is important for everyone on the panel, but in particular David Sarney, because this is a police interview and they're questioning the twins at the time of the investigation, and they explicitly say that Timothy Busfield did not touch them. But someone like Anna Sonoda knows that sometimes children are afraid to come forward. Anna, by the way, I think last time you said only, I think, is it 3% of people who are sort of pointed to in these crimes are serving prison time. Is that right?
Well, let's go back over it. So
Yep.
just as a refresher, 30% of all child sex abuse crimes are reported to the police. So 70% are never even reported to authorities. Of that 30%, according to statistics, 50% are thrown out because of a lack of evidence or a lack of ability to prove somebody's culpability. So it's extremely important when we think about this case and any other case that communities may be dealing with, that the legal justice system, the justice system is not always the end result of a child sex abuse case. More than likely, it never goes reported and it never gets prosecuted.
Someone said they're addicted to STS. No words I like more than that. I kid on the show, but it is true. Better than being addicted to crack cocaine, a drug that David Sarney tried to get off the streets of New York. Here is this portion of the hearing where the defense plays the audio portion of the investigation where the boys deny that Timothy Busfield ever touched them. And then you wonder, well, why are we here to begin with? But let's watch it. We'll get David Sarney, Anna, and John's take on this. Let's listen to this.
Use my microphone here. I'd like to play, for your honor, use my microphone here. I'd like to play, for your honor, Defense Exhibit Z. This is an audio-only clip of the first interview that police had with the boys in 2024. And Ms. Brandenburg-Koch has said, it's not good practice to be asking kids questions before a safe house. I agree. And what this evidence shows is that there's been a good year and a half of their parents coaching them along before the safe house. So I agree. This is in the beginning. This is the first time they speak. And so this starts with VL, Your Honor. And assuming that my technological prowess is not terrible, I'm going to play it for you right now.
And you know what's right and wrong, right?
Hold on, we're going to start over.
VL, and that's all.
And obviously I'm not playing the whole interview, for Your Honor.
And you know what's right and wrong, right? You know where people can't touch, where people can't do. Yeah, you know that, right? Does Tim ever do that?
No, he's never touched me.
Never touched you?
Yeah.
In like, your private areas, right?
Yeah.
Never did that?
Never.
Okay.
Let's go on, Your Honor, to Defense Exhibit AA. This is 5 minutes later, separate. The boys were separated. The same police officer, this time speaking to SL, out of the presence of his brother.
So, you know what's right and wrong, right?
Yeah.
You know no one could touch your private areas?
Yeah, but he doesn't touch them.
Doesn't touch your private parts? Okay.
That's not, Your Honor, a failure to disclose. That's an express denial. And the officer followed up just to make sure he didn't touch your private areas, because the conversation before, I'll express to Your Honor, the conversation before that was, does Tim tickle you ever? And they said, well, my shoulder sometimes. Do you like it? I kind of like it. I kind of don't like it. And then they went into the conversation about the private parts.
All right, so that's most of it, almost all of it. By the way, the defense ended by saying that these boys are not the victims of Timothy Busfield, but the victims of their parents. And I don't know which is true, but one way or the other, they are, I believe, victims here, caught in the middle of what is quickly becoming a huge mess. But David Sarney, to you first. I mean, you're the police retired NYPD detective. It sounds like this was a regular police officer. In other words, not a forensic interviewer for children. Is that problematic? And then I'm going to go back to the part where the questioning starts. It almost sounded like a leading question in a way. What did you make of it? Oh, you're muted, David. Let me see if I can get
These I got back. These issues are becoming more and more prevalent. We see this happen, and we try to avoid this. And this is what happened. New York City Police Department, NYPD, has a special victims division. They have an adult side and a child side. The child side has been trained in forensic these type of interviews, especially when it comes to children. When this report comes in, the police respond. And again, this is Albuquerque PD's responsibilities and what their procedures and protocols are. What should have happened then is when they responded to the scene is actually notify special victims. But this is the thing that we are doing more often now than some agencies do. We have a bigger department, first of all. So when this officer, I don't know what his training or experience is. I can't say that one way or another, and I don't want to put him in a bad spot. But he doesn't, maybe his questions are not really clear. His private area, that was what's documented and audio recorded. But we try to get investigators who are trained in talking to children. And that's the one thing. Did they break protocols? And I don't know the procedures of APD, but that would have made this at least a little bit better. It looks great for the defense because the denial, the lack of information beforehand is great. But are we doing the proper service to the investigation? And that's what it comes down to. And that's why you're going to have this back and forth. It's a he said routine. This is what you're coming down to, because these cases we all know are unfortunately very circumstantial. It's based on the statements made. There's no physical evidence that we have right now to show anything else. And I don't think that anything came up in physical evidence, just testimony and outcriers saying something. But the initial response to that scene should have been having trained, experienced investigators who talk to children. They could have been taken to a location. We have locations. We have child advocacy centers that we would take that child to, where we would have both a therapist and the investigator who's trained in dealing with children to talk to those kids to find out what really happened. And that's the problem here. That's where the initial problem of the case starts.
Yeah, let me take this back just a touch. Hold on one second.
Koch has said, it's not good practice to be asking kids questions before a safe house. I agree. And what this evidence shows is that there's been a good year and a half of their parents coaching them along before the safe house. So I agree. This is in the beginning.
Is it? Hang on. Yeah, this is the right. Here we
This is the first time they speak. And so this starts with VL, Your Honor. And assuming that my technological prowess is not terrible, I'm going to play it for you.
And you know what's right and wrong, right?
Hold on. We're going to start over. And obviously I'm not playing the whole interview for Your Honor.
And you know what's right and wrong, right? Where people can't touch, where people can't do. Yeah, you know that, right?
David Sarney, and then I'm going to go to Anna. He leads into it. Areas you can't touch, right? You know the difference between right and wrong. It sounds like he's offering the child information for the child to then turn around and potentially use. What do you make of the interview style?
Well, it was definitely lacking. And this comes back to training experience. This should have been started initially with a special victims investigator. Once they get notification about this, if it's out of your wheelhouse, and this is protocol. They're saying within APD's responsibilities, they're supposed to take it to a safe house and do this. Why wasn't that followed up? I can't tell you, but you now create and generate a problem, because now it's been a year and a half since this initial complaint came into being. That case should have been forwarded to the detective squad. Let the detectives, the trained investigator, interview that child in a forensic manner, because that's the training. That's what they go for. Cops on the beat may not have exactly that training, and they just get a checkbox that they went to the training. But when it comes to the regular routine parts of interviewing, that's where that got lost here. And I think that was the initial problem off the bat, because now you had a year since that initial complaint coming in, that initial investigation, and now you have what you're going to have is defense fight then saying, see, now they had a year and a half to build this case up.
Let me play a touch more, then we'll go to Anna.
Does Tim ever do that?
No, he's never touched me.
Never touched you?
Yeah.
In your private areas, right? Yeah. Never did that?
Never.
Again, he's asking a question, Anna, but and the boy answers no, and then he follows up with, in your private areas, you could argue that he's leading them into literally that area, figuratively and literally. Your thoughts on this exchange here, Anna?
Oh, I think it's completely mishandled. When
Mm.
you think about, I think in that state, New Mexico, it's called a CART exam. But when you look at other states, there are systems, there are very child-friendly environments. First of all, we don't know the setting and the environment that this set of twins was under when this questioning was going on. We know that they were separated. We don't know what sort of environment. When you look at child advocacy centers, they have really large, beautiful spaces. It's very comforting. They have lots of cuddly animals and teddies and things like that. They offer the child something comforting, like something to eat or something to drink. And it's certainly not questioning in the way that we've just seen displayed in this tape. I do not think that that helps the case at all. But in terms of child sex abuse cases, it's also not uncommon for your listeners to be aware of the fact that sometimes, even after children report a crime has occurred, that they can recant. They're afraid of the consequences of what they've said. They're afraid of the individuals who maybe have more influence and more power than they do. And they're possibly worried about getting in trouble, like your kids, like my kids. First thing they think is, oh my gosh, well, I'm going to not say that again. So the case as it unfolds is going to be really dynamic, because you do have a situation in which it seems as if the officer is maybe leading in this case, but the first step should have been taken to think about, what do the children need? The children need to be in the best environment for their own comfort and their own safety, and that was clearly not done here.
Mm. And John Day, there was a question from Louisa. Why even present the case before a grand jury? What's happening here?
So grand jury is a secret proceeding. It's 12 or whatever, how many jurors. It's totally controlled by the prosecutor. The prosecutor gets to lay out their evidence. The expression, and I know this as a prosecutor who did a bunch of grand juries, that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor wants them to. Now, in New Mexico, there is the law that if there's exculpatory evidence, it's got to be presented. The other alternative is a preliminary hearing, which is sort of a mini trial where the prosecution presents its evidence. The defense gets to cross-examine witnesses and present evidence if they want. But if you're a prosecutor, you always want to go the grand jury route, because you have much more control over what gets presented and how it gets presented. This case is going to be an interesting one in front of a grand jury.
Yeah. How soon could a grand jury convene on this, John?
I think they're going to probably want to do it relatively quickly. Since he's out of custody, the time limits are extended. If he were still locked up, it would have to be pretty quick. But, going back just to the question about the audio, the officer interviewing the boys, you have to believe that the officer had he's going to be talking to the parents ahead of it. You don't just grab two boys and say, hey, I want to talk to you. The parents have to be involved at some level. The defense is going to be saying, hey, you heard that tape. You can make up your own mind whether or not that sounds credible. But I agree with Anna that I've done cases, prosecuted them mainly, where you have a delayed disclosure because of the same things that she touched on. So it does happen, and it doesn't reduce the damage that was done. It just means that these kids weren't necessarily ready to talk about it. And that's what the whole therapy process is for. The other side of that is the defense is going to, hang a lot of their case on that, saying, look, this was a spontaneous statement by these kids. There was no pressure. You got to believe what they said. So it cuts both ways.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it just seems like there's too much reasonable doubt. And at one point, the defense attorney made that argument to the judge today, saying this case could never be proved because of that. There is just too much reasonable doubt everywhere. And at least right now, I sort of tend to agree with that, but I'm not the jurors, I'm not the judge, and I'm not the decider of this. But Robin During here, this is a great question for Anna, author of Duck, Duck, Groom. Are there ways to tell if a child has been coached, Anna?
Ooh, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. What I will say is that oftentimes, if we, in a child sex abuse case, for example, we're going to pad in added time. We're not going to hold the child accountable to what they say, 5 minutes after disclosure. We know that the process of disclosure is almost like walking through the woods, right? It can take ebbs and flows and turns that were not always expected. And oftentimes, what we're trying to do is we're trying to put all the pieces together, because if you've ever had a conversation with a child, you know that it doesn't go from point A to point B to point C. It meanders a bit. And in these cases, when we explore how grooming can affect victims and survivors, we know that it's a process of building influence. So in that child's mind, if they are coached, then we may see that there are gaps or divots in what they've told or what they've said. Usually children who are survivors have very clear idea of what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and it's going to be extremely interesting to see if the prosecutorial team on this case has the quote unquote evidence. But I hearken back to the majority of cases which never see the inside of a courtroom. So we have to do everything we can to educate ourselves about predation and sexual predators so that we can keep our families safe, in the light of the fact that most predators are not behind bars or on a sex offender registry list.
Yeah. Greta Winter Carlson, unless more evidence is found, they will never get 12 people to agree on a verdict in this case. I tend to agree with that statement, at least right now. But one of the things that has already happened is someone else has come forward, and that's more of a John Day question. Will these witnesses potentially be able to testify? I cannot believe that they even brought this uh, before a judge before taking it to a grand jury. So a lot of questions. But David Sarney, to you, there's Sasha. When parents are the primary, kind of narrators of allegations, so it's and the father in this case has got a very checkered past, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But when the parents are the primary narrators of the allegations, what red flags are you looking for with the parents as an investigator? What do you have to look for in them?
Well, juveniles aren't able to make a complaint because they do the parents are the ones that do, because they have to initiate it. So what you're doing is you have to make sure you're doing all of the checks on the parents also. You're doing all the work because it's an allegation. You have enough information of the allegation. Now you build that case. This is where they're coming. They have outcries. They have people they've had the doctors therapists who've interviewed them. You're having all of this situation. It is very speculative. You're still looking for some sort of evidence, some really not transparent, but touchable evidence. And that's the problem. You can look at the parents, see how they go. That's why when the interviews take place, the interviews are done in the Child Advocacy Center without the parents present, because you don't want the parents actually sitting in on these things, because they do add stress to that situation. And again, when you talk about the initial interview, you have a police officer going to the hospital. Was this done in the hospital when they're in a room with just a cop? And that's possible, and that's a problem. So when we talk about these things, we have to try to get away from the parent, and that comes back to the interviewing of the children, the interview of the juveniles. So you want to make sure there is none. And you have to, that's why the stories, unfortunately, try to stay with one investigator. You don't want to have a myriad of investigators talking to them, because it kind of confuses them. So you try to get one investigator that they can be confident and trustworthy and feel trust within that investigator. So when they talk to them, they can determine that whether or not they're being coached or not. When we talk about people finding out if they're deception and they're lying, people lie all the time. What you have to do is find the evidence or find the information they give you and refute that or support it by whatever documentation that you have for it. And right now, again, this is coming back to, this was an arraignment. This whole thing, they've called pre-detention hearing. We have it as an arraignment. When the grand jury takes place, and I gather they could, defense could serve cross, that's a chance of serving cross, and you may not get an indictment, because all you have is people telling you a story, but is that story enough to prove? I mean, I'm very surprised the prosecution pushed it this far without getting anything more not just vague like this when it comes to just statements made by children and outcriers such as their therapists.
Mm. Ellie M. Doc, who's often in the chat, with her dog that looks like Sasha-esque. As a member of a grand jury that were presented with many child SA cases, we wanted to see clinical notes from a licensed specialized interviewer, or we did not have it go forward. In this case, they do have notes from medical doctors, or investigative notes from medical doctors and from the police. So we'll see how it lands with a potential grand jury here. Do you believe, this is from Judy Herbert, a friend of mine, friend of the show, do you believe Melissa Gilbert has or will be questioned if she has any knowledge of the alleged crime? David Sarney, this is a you question from Judy. Do they have to, or have they already interviewed Melissa Gilbert to say, did you know about, have you known of any sorts of issues with Tim Busfield, your husband?
Well, husband and wife confidentiality, that's going to be up to her to even make a determination whether to talk or not. Has she been approached? I'm hoping that she was somewhat aware in this investigation to find out anything. And I guarantee you she said nothing, because she's at the court hearing. She is they are married. They're married for an extended period of time. Maybe she doesn't see anything, unless maybe somewhere along the line she has some sort of vision where she something she knows happened. But right now she doesn't have to testify. She's not going to testify unless she has this epiphany that something did happen with her husband and these kids. And so far, it doesn't seem to be the case right now.
I think thank you, David. I think this is true too. Deep thinker Deb with the Detroit Tigers there. Either way, his future career / career is ruined. They already canceled, and I think it was a Law and Order episode that he was in. They also have edited around another show, and I don't think anyone's going to be in a rush to hire him, at least not for the foreseeable future. So it's certainly going to take a toll career-wise on him, and he relies on acting to pay his bills, I'm sure. But John Day, the question was raised by Amy Carcaterra, I believe I'm saying that right. Statute of limitations, with murder, there is no statute. But what about, these types of acts? Is there a statute of limitations on it? And then I'm going to have another question for you.
Yeah, in this case, the statute, the clock has started because these were reported and these were filed. There are situations where, if someone recovers a allegation from years past, that courts allow you to file things. But in this case, that's not the issue, only because they did make a report and the DA chose to file. So the clock is ticking, and normally on a felony, it's a 5-year statute of limitations in New Mexico. In this case, that clock has already started.
Yeah. And John Day, one of the things I noticed, and I think other people noticed, and it was a little cringeworthy, was Melissa Gilbert sort of laughing and smiling through a lot of the hearings. She is the wife, the defendant in this case. If you're the defense, and she was, by the way, she was sitting with Larry Stein, who is their attorney, very prominent attorney, but shouldn't they there he is, that's Larry Stein, and that's Melissa Gilbert. But shouldn't she be coached? It was a little off-putting just as a viewer here watching her reactions.
Yeah, it's optics. You want to tell you're not only a defendant, but also the defendant's family and supporters that there are going to be cameras on you. People are going to be watching you, and you just want to have a poker face through the whole thing. It's understandable to have some kind of emotional reaction, say that he's getting released, but you don't want to be walking into a courtroom and looking like it's, giggles and grins. That's not a good look.
Yeah, for sure. Not a good look. And I think someone is probably going to advise her, half pint from Little House on the Prairie. The irony in all this is that she was a child actor. Now, the guy right behind the white-haired man, who's the attorney, Larry Stein, in the second row, a lot of people were like, is that Steven Spielberg? And I'm almost certain it's Timothy Busfield's brother, but he's almost a dead ringer for Steven Spielberg, which took some people by surprise. But Anna, back to you. When you send younger kids to therapy to deal with whatever allegations they might have brought forward, or to speak to therapists, does it have an impact on their memory formation? In other words, I've heard from different therapists that, children can have a lot of trouble with recollections. It could be, they could have two completely different recollections about the same, let's say, trip to Disney World.
I think this is a really interesting topic that you're bringing up, because in therapy, one of our roles is to encourage and promote disclosure of situations that are happening, good and bad. And you're bringing up a really interesting component, which is how much of this environment or this setting is influencing what they are recalling and how they're recalling it. It's almost as if when one of my children comes to me and says, "Oh, I have a sore throat," I can take that all the way from you need a glass of water all the way to we need to go to the doctor, right? So in cases like this, there is a range, and the therapists are not always trained in child sex abuse. They're not always, aware of cases of this nature and what's really on the line, because that's a privileged communication between that child and this therapist. And we also have to remember that, to the point that was made earlier, the parents are making these choices. The parents have selected the therapist, for example, and oftentimes a therapist will consult with the parents in advance of the first sessions with the minor child. It might even be that the parent is in the session at the start just to get the child warmed up. So we also don't know what sort of information the therapist received in the beginning. And you're absolutely right that recollection is individual. So you could take two children to the same event and they would have very different perspectives and very different stories. What we have to remember here is that this is a case with two independent victims, and their stories may be the same, but they may be different. There may be differences in their experiences and what happened. And I do not envy the position that the prosecutorial team is in here to try to weed through and determine what is true and what's not. And as it was said earlier, there is not physical evidence in this case, but the therapists and all of the notes that were taken, as well as the physician, are going to be called into question. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you missed it, we covered the hearing live. It was a detention hearing, and the headline is that Timothy Busfield will be allowed out of jail pending either a trial or a dismissal of the case under some pretty strict conditions, but sort of standard operating procedures for defendants like him. But he will be a free man probably as we speak. Now, the flip side, Anna, just back to you on this. Have you seen case of false allegations? So we talk about the percentages and how so few people are charged and the reasons behind that. But do we also see kids coming forward and making allegations that simply are not true, either because they're pressured by their parents or for some other reason?
95% of the time, children reporting child sexual abuse are telling the truth. In less than 5% of cases, they are coached. And typically, and I'll ask John Day about this, typically from what I've seen and from what the research has displayed, it's in custody cases. So it's in divorce proceedings or custody. Is that what you've also seen, John?
Yeah, it's common. It's way too common in those cases. And I think judges get a little jaded about it because it seems like in every single case, somebody makes that kind of an allegation, which, is unfortunate, because when you have the real situations, when things are really happening, it's sort of like, the boy who cried wolf. But in the criminal cases, it certainly does happen. The motivation is very different than in a custody case and a divorce case, something like that. But, and I've seen that as a former prosecutor, that there can be, the delay is not necessarily mean that they're false. It's just, as Anna knows, as anyone who deals with kids who are being treated or being in any kind of counseling or therapy, things come up. They're not little adults, they're little kids.
And John Day, Christine TD here. Are the medical doctor's notes on the boys' physical conditions or psychological conditions? Makes a big difference, in my opinion. Both coaching and abuse can create psych difficulties. But John, I believe it was the psychological side, not the physical side, correct?
No, right. We haven't seen anything yet that there's any physical evidence of any abuse. I mean, that's, the allegation is simply touching, the criminal sexual contact allegation is touching on the outside of clothing. There's no allegation of what, touching under the clothing or anything other than that. I think that's limited to that. So there's no physical evidence. And in a case like this, they apparently didn't get examined medically until a long time after. So, depending on the allegations, there wouldn't be any physical evidence. It's going to be the psychological records that are going to be bolstering the prosecution's case.
Yeah, I'm getting back to David in a second. Thanks, John. And Anna, to you from Rose Batista, my beloved Mabel Rose, my puggle of 17, almost 17 years. Rose warms my heart. It is more likely for teens to make false allegations than kids this young. Is that true, Anna? Is it generally older kids making the false allegations? Are there even statistics on that?
I don't have a good statistical background on that. I can certainly find that research specifically, but I think when you're looking at custody or family cases in which this can pop up, typically, you're dealing with minors who wouldn't be able to make that choice. And I know in certain states, children of a certain age in their adolescence are actually given more liberty about whose home they would like to spend time with. So I don't have a clear and fast answer about this age group versus another age group. I think what we have to keep in mind here is that these young boys were age 11, I believe, when these allegations were, when the disclosure first popped up. And so they're still young and they're still in their adolescent period. And we know that children are at high risk for child sexual abuse as they enter puberty. That's one of our highest age categories, is that like age 12 to 15, 16. So it's important for us to consider that all of us can learn something from this case. And as we talked about last week, this sense that we're protecting children, but we're also protecting adult reputation. So it's confusing to me how on a set where you have loads and loads of cameras, that there's not something that Warner Brothers does that not only protects the children who are working on these sets, but also protects the reputations of the adults who are in these environments. I didn't read anything about him isolating the children or taking them off by themselves, which frequently pops up in cases I work with. So I'm confused about the scenario themselves and the risk factors that are inherent to movie sets.
Yeah, and we heard from director of photography. That was kind of interesting. Some people had issue with that witness. I'll ask John about that in a minute. But how old are the children? They were 7 and 8 when we were working on set, but they were older when they were interviewed, and I believe that they are 11 right now. David Sarney, just back to you, retired detective with the NYPD. What is the significance, or how significant is it that it appears that the reports were all written and authored by a single detective here? Is it possible that a single detective, and we don't know, but it appears that he was the one working this case, and by all accounts, we don't know of anybody else who worked the case, but you always hear of tunnel vision. Should there always be multiple detectives working a single case so that doesn't happen?
Well, I've done detective work. I've done cases by myself. At this type of case, you want to make sure everything is done. And that's the issue that you're going to have. If every report's done by this detective, they're going to say, is there confirmation bias involved? Did he already think that, it's not what I think, it's what I prove. I think he did it, thereby I'm going to make the evidence fit what he is. And as a detective, you have to walk in unbiased. You have to be the one who really takes this case and takes the facts that are there, put them in an order that makes sense, creating that narrative, and then giving the narrative to the prosecutor and saying, can we prosecute this case or not? And that's what it comes down to. The detective was there and the prosecutor believed there's enough evidence for probable cause to make the arrest and get this arrest warrant based on what information was given. Now, as a defense attorney is what they always do, and I've been on the stand several times, they attack paperwork, documentation, times, locations, dates, and all of that. That's what's going to happen. So when the detective has all this, he's got to make sure he did everything. And the grand jury, when that goes through grand jury, he'll be the one testifying to what he has. It'll be very limited testimony. But when it comes to other hearings and trials, he is going to be the main focus of that. And he will be attacked on that. And should another detective have been helpful? Could there have been one doing some documentation on the side? It's possible. He might have been the one, the investigator who dealt with all the interviews, who documented all of what the therapist said and all of that. He could be doing that. And it happens. It's not a huge department. This is a detective. And this was going to go back to on as far as defenses, his training and experience in dealing with child cases like this. How many sex abuse cases you've done? How many sexual assault cases have you ever done? That's all going to come into play when this goes further. But the detective had enough information that he forwarded to the prosecutor, said, yes, we have enough to at least make the arrest on him.
The children here, why thanks, excuse me, David, I appreciate that. But the children were never left unattended, and the allegations where it happened on the set around other people. And that's why they brought on this director of photography. And again, I've got some notes on him. I'll go back and look at those. But he essentially said he vouched for Timothy Busfield, saying in a sworn affidavit that, the kids were never unattended. He described the father as a kind of a creepy alpha male. But then the government sort of honed in on this witness, John Day, and asked at whose urging did you offer up this affidavit, John? And he paused. He was kind of stumbling a little bit there. And then he said it was Melissa Gilbert. Is that a problem?
I think when you have a witness like that, he works in the industry. He worked with Timothy Busfield. A jury, for example, is going to look at him and say, how much credibility do we give this guy? Does he come across as believable? He says he never saw, the kids were never alone with Busfield. He never saw anything inappropriate. The jurors are going to give that witness the weight they think it deserves. Do they think he's, in the tank for Busfield, or do they think he's neutral? The best witnesses are the real neutral witnesses, the doctors, nurses, pathologists, people who are they don't have a dog in the fight. So I don't know in the end, or the final analysis, how helpful he would be. The defense obviously thought he was helpful for the judge, and the prosecution, they tried to score some points with him by saying, yeah, at whose request did you make that affidavit and how'd you do it? But, jurors get to use their own eyes and ears and judge the credibility of these witnesses. And who knows if it goes to trial, how he's going to come across.
Yeah, and John Day, this is a great question. Arriving late, did he get bail? And hello, while he's being, let out of jail pending a grand jury indictment and or a trial. But was any bail set? I don't recall hearing the judge. So why not?
Own recognizance. Show up in the future. Check in with pretrial services. No ankle bracelet. No house arrest. No, he can go back to New York State if that's where he lives. So we don't do. New Mexico is one of the states that's had a change. There's no actual bail. There are conditions of release. And so he got really almost the least restrictive release condition you can get. It's like, go home, don't commit any crimes, and show up in the future. That was pretty much it. And don't be around any underage children without supervision. That was the one specific thing the prosecution asked for.
David Sarney, John Day has a Doberman named Sasha, and we see a large black and white cat behind you. What's this guy's name? He looks annoyed at you. He's got his back to you on purpose.
He's always annoyed. It's Tommy too. I have 3 cats. It's Tommy 2 times. He's one of those Hemingway cats with 6 toes. So he's annoyed because I think he wants to eat in a little while, but he's gonna have to wait. He slept most of the day, so he's 14. He'll be fine. The other 2 cats aren't here. That's why he's a little angry. He's not getting his stage time, I guess.
Yeah, even the cats have attitude in New York City. Look at this guy. He's got his back.
He's turned around. He's annoyed. He's like, what are you doing? What are you talking about?
And he's named after a Goodfellas character, right?
Yeah, I have my other cats. One is Don Fanucci, the little one, and I have a one-eyed cat. He's named Mo Green. So there you go.
Classic New York right there. John Day. The judge brought it up about self-surrender. How important is it that he turned himself in? That Timothy
that's been an issue. Yeah, it's been an issue, this whole thing. Well, the warrant went out on a Friday. He didn't show up until 3.5 days later. The explanation from his defense lawyers, I kind of get it, because if you hear there's an arrest warrant for you, you can do a couple things. You can go turn yourself in at the local police station, and you'll probably wait there a month while the extradition process takes place. And I've done a lot of extradition cases, and it's a lot of paperwork. You can try to get on an airplane, but that means going through a TSA checkpoint where your name's going to come up somehow on a list of people who are wanted. You can charter a private jet to get to Albuquerque, or you can do what he did, which was apparently get in a car, drive 2,000 miles, don't get pulled over for speeding or going too fast in a school zone, and get here as fast as you can. There was a lot of, he was attacked for not showing up right away. I kind of buy the explanation by his defense team that he got here as quickly as he could. He wasn't on the run necessarily. That the claim was that, well, you should have turned yourself in right away. But, when you hear these circumstances, I kind of buy it. I didn't see anything particularly, nefarious in how long it took him to get here. It's a long drive. We're kind of out here in the Rockies, and if you're in New York State, it takes a while to get here.
Yeah, 2 days, you said he drove. Lisa Mitchell here. We are a pet-friendly show. I absolutely love that David has 3 cats and John has a dog. Love animals, and animals much better than human animals. There's no doubt about that. We've got a little chunk of the state's argument here, I believe. Let me play this. We'll get reaction from everybody on the panel. This is earlier, just before the show. There was a detention hearing in New Mexico. Timothy Busfield, a free man, at least for the time being.
There was medical concerns about sexual abuse prior in November of 2024 made by the doctor after seeing the kids in this case. So how this even started was because a doctor, in his experience, was concerned. Not because of anything else besides what he thought and what he saw during presentation of the kids.
I'm going to hold it right there. John Day, if I'm a juror, now my ears are perked up because now she used the word doctor. I equate that with a profession. Oh, John Day is not there. Anna, I'm going to go to you on that. Now my ears are perked up because I'm hearing doctor. I'm hearing an Anna Sonoda type, a professional who knows about this is saying this. I mean, how much weight should be given to this?
Well, I find it very interesting. Nowadays, we're assessing children in pediatric visits for history of child sexual abuse as part of checks for things like domestic violence and guns in the home and things like that. So we don't actually know, or at least I don't know as of yet, under what conditions this topic was brought up. Do these appointments, you have children, you're not leaving them alone in the doctor's office. So typically parents are accompanying their children. Who's to say that a parent wasn't filling out a survey or some sort of form and mentioned a history of child sex abuse? We don't know if the origin came from the children or if it came from one of the caregivers. So I think that's a detail that I would like to see fleshed out.
But again, to reiterate, the prosecutor here talking about a medical doctor apparently, signed off and was the one that alerted a detective about this. I guess after being questioned or before, it's not clear. But let me play this part out here.
I've already laid out, and I know the court is very aware of how kids disclose abuse. This is the norm. It is not shocking to the state that they didn't disclose to police right away, especially when the questions were inappropriate. They were leading in everything that best practices say how kids should not be asked questions.
I'm just going to stop there because this is Anna Sonoda. Anna, your reaction to that? The prosecutor saying it is the norm for kids to generally not disclose or change their mind about the disclosure they're making.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to remember is that in 99% of cases, grooming is involved. Grooming is a process by which we're changing the power and influence from caregivers or other safe adults to the individual who is preying on these children. Now, in this case, we have no idea, but it is often common that a child will say something happened and then can recant because of fear of consequences. Predators are very good at convincing children of their absence of agency, right? Children lack agency. They don't have credit cards, they don't have car keys, they don't have independent decision making. So it's not uncommon to see kids in a situation like this who say, oh my gosh, well, what are my parents going to say? What is the man who hired me going to say? What about my prospects in acting, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that what she's saying is accurate most of the time, that kids can make a disclosure and they can also recant upon that. But typically with the appropriate, well-trained professionals who are used to working with survivors, they can often facilitate more open dialogue to get the truth to come out.
Lisa Mitchell again here. John Day, it's tough to read. I'll read it for you here. If he's acquitted, could Timothy Busfield sue the state for quote unquote false imprisonment? I mean, didn't they not have any concrete evidence on him? Oh, I think you're muted there. John, got to unmute you there.
So you can't sue a district attorney for prosecuting you. They're immune. I mean, if there was some evidence that a police department had somehow violated his civil rights, that's a different story. But especially if you get to trial and you're acquitted, there's already been a probable cause finding, like at a grand jury or a preliminary hearing. So, I mean, theoretically, yes. But if you're acquitted of a charge like that, I mean, that's really the last thing you want. You probably just want to move on with your life. People do it. They try it. It can be a difficult lawsuit. There really has to be some kind of egregious conduct that led to, the charges being brought. We haven't seen anything like that here.
Yeah, someone pointing out Barry Morphew did it. Barry Morphew's back in the hot seat, and he's
that was a bad choice. I mean,
yeah, that was a bad. Okay, here is. Do you happen to know the prosecutor's name here, John Day?
It's Ms. Brandenburg Koch, and she does out of the Albuquerque DA's office. This is her specialty. This is all that she does these days, and that's not, that's normal. You have a special victims unit type deal where all they do is child sex cases, and so she knows what she's doing, and she's going to have the backup of the whole office. But again, the case is only as good as what comes through the door. And in this case, what you're going to see is the defense, that very first officer who made the audio recording with the children, you're going to see the defense trying to bolster his credibility and experience in a way that they don't normally do with police officers, as we've seen. So that officer who did that interview is going to be one of the best witnesses that the defense has.
I like this comment. I like this chat. Very tough subject matter, and everyone is being kind and respectful. A safe place. We like to be a safe place for survivors. My mother's a child Holocaust survivor, so we're aware of some of the issues and experiences that survivors go through. So here is again Ms. Brandenburg Koch talking on behalf of the government.
For defense to get up here and say that their disclosures of sex abuse aren't credible because of the parents, even though they have continued to show signs and show and continue to disclose the abuse, all very similarly, is what is here in front of the court. Again, this isn't a mini trial, and yes, the court can judge credibility and the weight of the evidence. However, this is one factor. Of course, that's an easy defense to say these parents are liars and they're coaching their kids, and this could never happen. Even though there was concerns back in November of 2024, there was concerns again at therapy when the boys disclosed, there was concerns again with another medical professional, there was more concerns at Safe House. So this isn't a one-time disclosure where parents are telling them what to say. And I know the court is aware about coaching and how difficult it is to coach a child at that age and to continue and remain consistent.
Interesting point. I'll go back to Anna on that, and then just a tiny bit left on this piece of sound. You heard her say how tough it is to coach and remain consistent. Anna, can you speak to that?
Sure. If a parent or another adult wants to convince a child of a certain story, they're going to need to make sure that they have buy-in on the part of the child. And it's very difficult to get them to memorize a certain story. And some of what the professionals who are in this field and in this space do during their interviews within safe environments. They're really trying to help facilitate the child from sharing as many details as that child feels comfortable sharing at the time. And if a child has been told, well, this is the point you say, if that is not actually something that happened, it can be awfully difficult for a child to, exactly in her words, to stay consistent. Does the story change over time? Does it trip? And does the child trip up? That's something that somebody would be looking for. Are there inconsistencies in the storytelling?
And I'm gonna get to the at least the father in this case in just 1 second. Let me finish out here. This is the prosecutor making her case today at the detention hearing, and we'll hear from David Sarney on the flip side here.
Kids are at this age, very black and white. To then say, oh yes, I'm gonna lie and exactly how my parents told me to say it, even though they were able to give details of how he touched them. They corroborate the defendant's statement that, yeah, he did tickle them all over, which I think is important because defenses, all of their exhibits contradict what the defendant also already admitted to, that this conduct could never happen. And nobody saw anything. The witness himself said, I was with him 100% of the time, but never saw this tickling or touching, even though the defendant himself said he did it on set and getting them ready to act. So that is not reliable when the defendant's own testimony, own statement to police is that he did in fact touch them.
That is the prosecutor. And David Sarney, that's a very interesting point because Timothy Busfield admitted to police in an interview that he was tickling his children. And when this witness was up there, he said that Timothy Busfield never touched these kids, never did anything, and he knew that for certain. But in his own words, Timothy Busfield basically busts up this witness's testimony. How important is that?
That's important. I mean, you have that information. Apparently, the children were never offset with him. That's what they're saying. You have a witness said he 100% of the time never saw the tickling. He was kind of alluding the fact that the father was having his twins or his kids hug everyone on the set. But then you have Busfield kind of refuting what his own witness says, that he did touch them. And it comes back to, is what those touches criminal? It was believed to be, based on the evidence that they have and the interviews they have, that the touches were actually criminal contact, which is sexual contact, even though it's above the clothes. That's where they're going with this. And that came from the interviews. I don't know if Detective Brown was the interviewer with the defendant in this case. I don't know that. That didn't come out. That wasn't said. He seems to be the main player in this. But the detective had enough evidence, and I go back to this. The prosecutor believed there's enough to go on. And as you look at this and you look at this case, it's going to be very difficult. They believe they're going to get, I don't know if they're looking for a plea arrangement at this point, a plea agreement, but when it goes to grand jury, they're really going to have to show the grand jurors and have them buy into the fact that the conduct that the defendant had is criminal, or is it creepy? And that's what it comes down to. Timothy, sort of the defendant in this case, said his actions, he did touch them. Is that creepy? In my world, yeah, it's creepy to have touching kids you don't know, but is it criminal? And that's where you're coming down to. But the prosecution believed this is criminal.
And John Day, yeah, great point, David. And John Day, you're the lawyer here. So what does the law say? Is tickling, if that's all it was, but the allegations are not that that's all it was, but let's just say they can prove the tickling. Is that criminal, John Day?
I mean, theoretically, it's a battery, but it has to be something done sort of in a rude, insolent, angry way. I mean, you're not supposed to touch other people. That's kind of the bottom line, right? You just don't do that unless it's a consensual thing. And, it's like one thing if it's your old college buddy, or you don't touch other people's children. I mean, I think that witness for the defense actually made that point, which was he didn't like the idea that the father, according to him, was making the kids go up there and hug people. But, it gets back to what you said at the start, Joel. Either way, these kids are victims, whether it's victims of their parents or victims of Busfield. And it's sad.
Yeah. A few more minutes. We'll get final thoughts. It was a long hearing and a long day, so we'll wind it up a little sooner than we typically do. But Anna Sonoda, to you, tickling. Is that how predators generally start? We talked about this a little bit the last show, but what's interesting here is Timothy Busfield did admit to this while the witness said, no, the actor never touched anybody. And again, I thought it was interesting that it was Melissa Gilbert who reached out. They also got something like, 70 or 80 letters written on behalf of Timothy Busfield in a matter of 7 days, which just goes to show how many people will vouch, for a celebrity to try to save them. Keep in mind the Warner Brothers investigation. People there described Timothy Busfield as creepy and basically alluded to him doing some things that he should not be doing, but also saying that they didn't want to come forward because of fear of retaliation. But the bottom line here, Anna, tickling, where is it, I guess, on the spectrum of child SA?
This is a great conversation. What I recognize is that the predators I worked with, and oftentimes in child sex abuse cases in the grooming process, predators put their hands on children more and more often. So it might start with sitting close to a kid on a bus and then, putting a hand on their back or putting a hand on the knee. And then we're progressing to massaging or tickling or wrestling. These are not uncommon behaviors in the grooming process. But I can also imagine an environment like a movie set where you've got 2 7-year-olds who are, maybe sleepy or not enthusiastic. And as the director, he might be trying to pull upon his, his sort of uncle status, as I think I read that he wanted to be called Uncle Tim. I think there's this element of playfulness that sometimes parents or caregivers or other adults in an environment might, try to touch a child to invigorate them or wake them up or make them laugh or make them feel silly. And this, after all, is not a personal home. This is not a school environment. This is a movie set. This is where people have to put on different hats and they have to imitate different things. So I can also understand why it might be appropriate for somebody to try to spur some excitement out of these children before they go on set. But one of the things I want your audience to remember is that when we're looking at grooming behavior and touching for the purposes of grooming, oftentimes it's about progressive touch. So it's about going from I'm touching your shoulder to touching your back to touching, maybe your lower back or your inner hips or your inner stomach area. And I'm still trying to work out the details based on this story about if tickling was going on in front of the photographer, director, all the other individuals, the parents. This is when my red flags and my system as a caregiver would probably go off, and I'd say, oh, that's strange. You said earlier that some people at Warner Brothers describe him as creepy. Being creepy is not the same thing as being a predator. And this case is not wholly black and white. So I think what we have to remember is that as adults, we need to be aware of our behavior when we're interfacing with other adults and with minors, because our behavior can seem normal or natural to us. And then when we look at it from the lens of a case like this, we can all see that the perspective is what matters here. And tickling in, at a family reunion or on a movie set might seem normal, but then when you cloak it in the lens of grooming and potential allegations of child sex abuse, it takes on a completely different tone.
Yeah. Great point. And I made this point earlier, so I'll say this is a great point too. 2 things can be true: greedy parents and Timothy Busfield, a child predator. It doesn't have to be one or the other. No, they're not mutually exclusive. David Sarney, this is, to me, the most interesting part of this hearing, because I didn't know this, but the father of the twins here is named Ronald Rodas. At the time of this story, which was a few years back, he was 52. I think he's probably late 50s now. He's a disbarred attorney. He was a former lawyer in Long Beach. He was sentenced to 41 months in prison for his role in a mortgage fraud scheme. And then the defense also said he sold someone a Bentley with fraudulent title. and a few other issues that I don't think landed him in prison, but just speaks to the nature of his character. Also, speaks to the nature of his materialism. You know, he wanted Bentleys and he had a Porsche. Just seems like he was described by the witness as an alpha male, creepy alpha male. But here, he's the father of these boys, and he served time for mortgage fraud. I mean, as an investigator, what does that tell you?
Well, definitely he has a criminal past, so that's one thing. But does that mean the allegations are not true? But that also comes with the fact that he's been arrested. So you also listen when the director was saying also that the actors were making about 50,000 an episode, and they made a lot of money in the last 2 or 3 years. The thing is, he hasn't sued. He apparently had no civil suit as of yet. So he's also, that's something that comes into play too. This is as going back a little bit. Is this because he knows if he sues, it looks bad for his kids? That's the thing that comes into it. Just because you've committed a crime doesn't mean you're lying. You're going to lie about your kids and your kids' alleged abuses. That's the one thing. But it does stick in the back of your head as to why. Why now? Why did it took they did it in 2024. In 2025, they do it. Apparently, the kids were released from production. They were no longer working there because I think because the director said their faces changed and no longer part of it. But also there was something that came up where I think the one child went to work with Timothy on camera or for a scene and did not want to do that. So just because you're a criminal and you've been a convicted criminal, does that mean you're lying about everything in your life? Not particularly, but it does lend to the fact, is it a monetary issue? But on the flip side, he hasn't sued yet. There's no civil suit yet. So is it something that he's waiting for the prosecution to determine whether or not this happened and get a conviction, then go to a civil suit? This is things that come in, but it's still the kids are involved. The victims are still the kids, and that's what you're working for. He becomes an unsavory a complainant in a sense, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's lying about this situation.
Yeah, and the threshold is much lower, which John could explain in a civil suit. Phantom 6000, friend of mine, friend of the show. I remember the father's case, 41 months and 3.8 million in restitution with the feds. Not a great fact pattern. And then you've got 4 separate care providers, Anna Sonoda, saw red flags of SA. I mean, what does that tell you, Anna?
I would want to follow up with all of those. What did they see under what conditions? And at what point did the parents, because it's my impression that children are not just allowed nowadays to run around a set without supervision or tutors or people who are their guardians. So it seems curious to me if there were 4 independent individuals who had concerns about grooming behaviors, that nobody was remarking about it, nobody was taking action. But what we have to remember is that the environment itself, that oftentimes predators will put themselves in environments where they have more influence and they have the support of other adults around them. So if you are the one who's hiring people to be on the set with you, you're the one to give them their job and pay them their salary, you can understand why some people in that circumstance would choose to be quiet. So it's a conundrum. It's trying to figure out what's out of this gray is truth.
Very, very good point. John Day, final question, and we'll get some final thoughts here on a long, busy day. The headline, if you're joining, and we've got the full hearing under our live tab just before this live video. You will see the hearing from earlier today in its entirety, a little bit over 2 hours. Anxious to hear what the big win is. Can anyone share? I mean, the headline from this is that Timothy Busfield walked out of jail today, pending either a trial or a grand jury indictment. We don't know exactly what's next. But John Day, they also raised the issue, the defense did, about Timothy Busfield taking a polygraph, on his own, of his own volition and passing that. I guess my question is, why are polygraphs not really accepted in courts of law? Is it quote unquote junk science, John?
Well, it depends who you ask. In New Mexico, they are admissible. It's one of the few states that allows the results to come in. There's a procedure. The prosecution gets to challenge it. I use them a lot. I mean, I think there's value in them. Look, the U.S. government uses them. The CIA and the FBI use them all the time for various things. So at least the United States government thinks they have some credibility. But there's value in it. If you're, say, a defense lawyer and your client passes it, you've got to be able to establish that the science is good and the polygrapher is reputable. He or she knows what they're talking about. But in a case like this, I can see why Busfield's defense team said, take a polygraph and let's see what the results are. And they were obviously good, because of a good, competent polygrapher who cares about his reputation is going to be a tough grader on those things. So that should come in front of the jury, and also the grand jury, I would think. So that was a smart move on the part of the defense team, because they got a good result. And whatever you think of polygraphs, it's at least one more tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, forgive my ignorance. There's also a test. Anna, you might know this off the top of your head. But I was invited on, not Megyn Kelly hosting it, but she's got a true crime channel hosted by someone else. And she was talking about a test they give to people where they will literally show images, of naked man, naked woman, to see what kind of emotions that is eliciting. What is that test, Anna?
Yes, this is very common in the treatment of sexual offenders. Every client that I worked with had one of these assessments done. Depending on where you are, it might be named something different. But at least here in the state of Georgia, for treatment of sexual offenders, they go through this baseline assessment to sort out what is your arousal level to different material. And I think what we have to remember is that if we are solely exclusively thinking that every predator is a pedophile, then this makes sense. But what we know more and more is that the amount of factors in the environment, substance abuse at the time of the crime, pornography use. We're seeing more and more research show that the more pornography an individual uses, the more and more likely they are to end up seeing child sexual abuse material because of the proliferation of those things. So I think we have to be conscientious of the fact that that measure, while it is useful for clinicians like myself and in the treatment, because what we're then thinking about is how do we make this person capable of living a normal life post prison. And every individual that I was working with was regularly polygraphed. As John was saying before, many facilities use it, certainly in cognitive behavioral therapy settings for recidivism. For reasons of recidivism, we want to be evaluating, is this person actually living the way that they say they are when they're in sessions? And we know that the recidivism rate for sexual offenders is anywhere between 5 and about 20%. So that's something that's extremely important for clinicians working in that field to recognize there's still an ongoing risk that this person could reoffend. But as we said at the beginning of this program, it's important for your audience to know that most sex offenders have never committed a crime that is inside of the justice system or that's prosecuted. So it's very important for us to be aware of what grooming actually looks like. And then if we see something, it behooves us and our communities to speak up about it and to raise a stink and to make other people aware. Because if this many individuals within Warner Brothers were aware of this situation and no one did anything, that does not look well on the organization itself.
No, it does not. And people openly said that they feared retaliation. I think one person said that they even were in possession of some photographs that could be damning. That's interesting. By the way, the witness did say this, that these twins were making about $50,000 an episode. The first season was 10 episodes. You can do the math. And the second two seasons, 2 and 3, were 12 episodes. Multiply that all by 50. Anna Sonoda is a licensed clinical social worker. She's the author of Duck, Duck, Groom. Final question and your final thoughts, Anna. But I guess, what is the biggest misconception about grooming that a jury would have and ergo people in general?
So people often misunderstand that grooming is a selective, intentional, incremental, and observable process. And we fail to teach people what grooming looks like in an understandable and digestible way. And what I'm trying to do every single day is to ameliorate that by shedding light on the grooming process. From what I learned, counseling convicted sex offenders, because once we learn what to look for, we can protect ourselves and our families.
Very well said. David Sarney, retired detective with the NYPD, the biggest and best in all the world. I'm a little biased because I'm from Jersey and I basically grew up with the NYPD next to the Highland Park, New Jersey Police Department, of course, which I think has about 4 police officers. David, just your final thoughts here. I mean, law enforcement can make mistakes in a case like this. What would you be most concerned about? And your final thoughts on what you watched today. You saw the hearing.
Yeah. Well, you have to evaluate when it comes to the work of police. You have to reevaluate it every time, and you're hoping to see that there'll be somebody in authority who knows the job, sees what the problems were with this, and tries to rectify it by changing policy protocol. But apparently, his policy may not have even been followed. So that's where it comes down to. Every law enforcement is done by human beings. We make mistakes? Yes. There's mistakes of the heart, mistakes of the head, mistakes where you just don't care, or mistakes where you just forget. That's going to come down to playing the grand jury. What did this detective do during his case? And if it goes to trial, if it does make it to trial, and that's going to be all of this. You're going to look at everybody, the mandated reporters. You're going to look at the Warner Brothers themselves. You're going to look at people who might have seen going on and said nothing. But we only can do what we can do if there is a crime. In 2024, was that a crime? What happened? We don't know, because the investigation never went forward, because the officer may not have asked the proper questions. It may not have been properly conducted or handled the way it should be done. And that's why special victims cases are very sensitive. And you have to really look at it, because there are many people involved that get hurt by this, the victims. And if it is a false accusation, also the subject, the arrested, the defendant in those cases. So you have to make sure you're on that balancing act and doing what's right, not doing the right thing, but doing what's right, to make sure, in the interest of the criminal justice system, to determine the facts, the person gets arrested by probable cause, and you have enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's handed to the prosecutor. As far as this case, you can see it helping or giving people a little more understanding about grooming. And this is what you're having. This case will fall to the wayside, unfortunately, as these social cases, these high profile, they move to the wayside. But you can see certain things coming out, such as grooming, dealing with kids with sex abuse, having people, and parents need to be openly communicating with their kids when adults get into their lives. What about this adult? Who is this person? What do they do? Make a visit, find out about them. That's what this hopefully teaches, because we don't get all the cases, because kids don't say anything, but the parents have to be actively engaged in communicating with their kids to find out what's going on in their lives and who's in their life.
Sarney does not bat an eye when the siren goes off. I still have PTSD from living in New York, where the sirens go off every 5 seconds and I have heart palpitations, but he does not budge. Is that your cat now on the other side in the corner of the counter, all the way back there?
That could be, no, they've moved around a bit. I have a dog in Florida, so he's not here. That's Furio. He's down in Florida Furio. Yeah. Furio's down there from The Sopranos. So he's down there.
Your cat
we have a lot of animals.
Your cat was so annoyed. He is now.
Oh, he's laying down, ticked off. He's like, when am I getting to eat?
We'll let him eat in a second. John Day.
Will.
John Day is a criminal defense attorney out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he held down the fort for us today. Someone raised an interesting point, John Day. The defense never came out and explicitly said our client is innocent. They just said he didn't do this. Interesting little discernment there, I guess, from one point to the other. But John Day, your final thoughts on all this. What happens next here? Is there a chance that there's no grand jury here, that some kind of deal is reached?
No, I don't think so. I think the defense has got, they're loaded for bear at this grand jury. And I think this is one case where you want to reserve judgment. You want to keep an open mind. You want to see how the prosecution and the defense lay out their cases. There's a lot here to unpack. There's a lot that's going to be developed and investigated as this thing moves on. I think the important thing with this particular case is, I would say, reserve making a judgment on guilt or innocence, see how this thing unfolds, because there's a lot on both sides. And I think as we saw today, when you hear the judge say the weight of the evidence is neutral, that to me, it was pretty significant. This was not a situation where he said, yeah, DA's office, you have a really strong case here. He said it's 50-50. And I think you got to take that and think about that a little bit when you're thinking about this case.
Do you think it's a weak case for the state right now?
I think it could be stronger. I think that what we saw today, and again, they didn't have to present everything they had, but I think we've seen what they have. And I think they've got a lot of work to do to make this a stronger case against what's on the other side and what Busfield's team has come up with. So I would say hold off on making a judgment on this until more information comes in.
We shall see. John Day, criminal defense. David Sarney, retired NYPD and a professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the best in all the land. And Anna Sonoda, licensed clinical social worker, author of Duck, Duck, Groom. Check out her book. Love you, America. Let's get just. These kids are victims one way or the other, either the parents or of Timothy Busfield, possibly of both. And the defense even said that. So let's get justice for them. We'll see you tomorrow. The au pair trial continues with the defense case. We'll see what they bring, if anything. And then Ellen Greenberg's parents are supposed to come on tomorrow night. That is the case that I think is closest to my heart of all the cases we've covered. If you don't know Ellen Greenberg, Google Ellen Greenberg. It goes all the way up the ranks to Governor Josh Shapiro. It is always shady in Philadelphia. He is the governor of the Commonwealth of PA. And please take a look at that case. We'll have her parents on tomorrow night. There's been some movement there. And finish out the week. We will finish it out strong. Love you all. That's my homage to Geraldo Rivera, who I once worked with when I first started. See you later.